welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach. I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. Elaine Yuan, to talk about her new book, The Web of Meaning, the Internet and a Changing Chinese Society. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I love your title, The Web of Meaning. What do you mean by that?
It's very much about how we created internet as a symbolic space, and then in this space, we talk about things. Therefore, we generate meaning as purpose in our life. So in other words, we create our own web of meaning according to which we act and operate.
So we sort of come to a consensus on who we are as a people.
Exactly,
and
who we are,
yeah.
what we do, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And how has the internet changed that over the years in China?
Well, the internet has played many different roles, and it has been pretty much indispensable in social transformations in Chinese society, which I think you know that has been changing so fast in recent decades. My book, it focuses on a specific aspect of the social change, that is the symbolic aspect of social change and the role.
So the symbolic aspect of the change, that would be things like what?
Symbolic aspect is that how these changes manifest in symbolic spaces enabled by the internet. For instance, in the West, we often talk about the public sphere.
Yes.
That's a
Jürgen Habermas.
Yes. So Habermas's public sphere is a space where people come together to rationally debate about things of common interest,
right.
And of importance.
He has lots of rules, right?
Right.
All have to have access to information, and
right.
They have to be acting freely and not be
right.
representing something else. Yeah.
Right. It's an egalitarian space. People have to be equal in terms of access, in terms of their statuses, and then the debate has to be carried out in a very rational fashion. And then it's oftentimes consensus-oriented.
Yes.
But such a model doesn't quite apply to what's going on in the symbolic space enabled by the internet in China.
Yeah, that interests me, because in Habermas's model, the consensus is formed in the public sphere, and then that influences the state, and the state passes legislation and things that reflect the consensus of the public sphere. But I don't expect that that's what's happening in China.
Exactly, because these kind of antagonistic relation between the state and society, the public sphere as one of those institutions that civil society relies on. Other institutions include rule of law, private properties, and so on and so forth. These institutions don't exist or are not as mature as they are in the Western society.
Yeah. So the public sphere doesn't exist by itself, in other words, right?
Exactly.
It's codependent on other things, and those other things aren't necessarily present in China.
No, although as a discourse, the public sphere as a discourse exists in China, in the sense that people oftentimes invoke this concept to express their wish or their hope that China would develop such a public sphere. If not now, maybe in the near future. That's the case as well. But that concept entails a slew of social institutions that may not have already existed in China. So that's why in this book I use a different model to describe the symbolic spaces enabled by the internet.
Yeah, it's interesting how connected all this is to economics, because I think Habermas argues that the public sphere comes about because of the free market, essentially, right? And that it's almost a free market of ideas. But so tell us, how is your field model different here? What are you working with?
Right. The field model emphasizes on differences, emphasizes on conflicts among participants in this space. The field, it's a structural. It's structured by different positions. So instead of just a egalitarian space, it has a hierarchical structure.
Okay.
And this structure is made of different positions. And these positions are defined by different forms of capital, like depending on which field we're talking about. Like, for instance, an example of a symbolic field would be, say, the journalist working on making news. And they would come together to form a field. It's one of the examples of a symbolic field. That is a field of journalism. Mm-hmm. Let's say that a journalist from the New York Times and versus a journalist from a local small newspaper. Obviously, the former has more symbolic cultural capital. Mm-hmm. They have like larger network,
bigger audience,
bigger audiences, larger networks, more powerful in this field. So in the businesses, in the goal or in the game of deciding what's news, these people occupying better positions, stronger positions, with more social resources, symbolic capital, they play a bigger role. So versus those people who occupy like weaker positions, they play less of a role in deciding what's news. So producing news is like a game, and this game takes place in this field.
Just to help make this more clear, so you define journalists as being in a field. You know, would teachers be a field? Would
exactly? So our
CEOs of companies
our social
be a field?
Life, our social life, it comprises of many such fields: political fields, economic fields, cultural fields, and in these fields. Are the way how our society operates, how things get produced, reproduced. Right. And the field model emphasizes on the reproduction of the existing unequal hierarchy.
So it has a hegemonic influence.
Exactly. So, and oftentimes people are unaware of that or unconscious of it. They take it for granted. Okay, they take this existing order as the order.
Yeah. So we have fields in the United States, right?
Yeah. I mean, this field is like a scholarly conception. It's a model.
Yeah. So the difference then is what? I mean, I guess in the United States, if all the journalists are reporting something and somebody disagrees with that, they can just go ahead and blog and say whatever they want, right? Is someone less likely to contradict the experts in China? Is that part of what happens here?
In the field, like for instance, going back to our example of this journalist field, yes, you can blog. Like for instance, that local newspaper journalist that can blog, but the chances of his blog to reach as many audience members as the one of the article published on New York Times is less. So the same mechanism applies to wherever such a hierarchy decides the results of the process. So in China, the reason that I apply this model to the Chinese case, it's because precisely because economic liberalization, diversification of social forces, and we see the gradual retreat of a previously totalitarian state. So I want to reflect all these changes. So when the internet serves as this symbolic space, all these social forces come together to occupy different positions and to play different games in different aspects of social life. Like for instance, in one of the three fields, privacy, how people understand privacy, what privacy means, our moral...
Privacy is one of the fields.
Is one of the empirical fields that I examine in this book. The other two are cyber nationalism and the network market. So these, I want to apply the field model to the understanding of how privacy operates, how the markets take shape, and how nationalism takes place. Yes.
So in Western culture, as Habermas defines it, the private world is those of us who choose not to engage in public discussion, essentially, right? And those things we do in our homes and those things that we're not doing in public, those are private interactions, and we have to step into a public space in order to be part of the public sphere. So are you defining that in a similar way for China?
Right. The public sphere model posits that private individuals come together to form the public.
Yes.
Whereas in the case of cyber privacy or privacy in the internet era is understood in my book as a field in the sense that people talk about privacy and practice privacy in mediated spaces, not only offline but also online.
Oh, I see. So there's no dividing line there,
yes. To go back to your question, that is, in the West, especially liberal democracy, privacy is a fundamental principle because it allows, it operates in the interest of individual liberty and autonomy and countering the government power. That's the first and foremost purpose of privacy. And then on top of that, you have the individuals, they practice privacy for the purpose of self-realization in the private realm. But in China, we didn't have a very indigenous concept of privacy.
Interesting.
So people's sense
Plus, it's a very different economic model, which plays into that.
Right. So their sense of privacy and their value of privacy grow out of their changing socio-economic contexts.
I see.
So there is no such overarching political philosophy demanding them to feel a certain way. Oftentimes, they have to adjust to the changing socioeconomic context. And so my goal was to find out, okay, so these days, privacy as a concept is on the rise. I want to know when they use the word privacy, what do they think about? What do they do? So how did I do that? So because the internet is integrated so deeply these days, not only in America, but also in China. So I went online, collect a bunch of user-generated data about privacy. And I use some method to tease out what are the different dimensions that this data allow me to discover. How, in other words, how people practice privacy.
How they practice privacy. That's,
Exactly.
That's fascinating. So what did you find out?
Right.
What are
I
some of
find
your
like there are
observations?
three, privacy is such a pervasive concept that people use it in many different domains. But the first and foremost is in the private domain, where they draw private, like personal boundaries. Like, for instance, they use privacy to negotiate their changing roles in the family, like how a mother role is supposed to be played, how a spousal role is defined. So previously, a traditional Chinese family is all about, not about the individual, but about extending the family lineage. It's for the purpose of the family itself, not individuals. But nowadays, such a traditional values are on the decline. So people are struggling. So should I be more? So we critics say that China has been experiencing these processes of individualization. Like the individual has become the basic social unit in social political life. Previously, it wasn't the case. In socialist society, all individuals were embedded in larger social entities. For instance, when you work for work unit, and then everything that you did was to be permitted by the superiors. Like, for instance, if you wanted to get married, it had to be okayed by your superior.
At work.
At work, in socialist era.
Yeah.
But nowadays, since the state has been gradually retreating from the social realm, so now the social realm is struggling to find its own organizing principles. So privacy has become one of those key concepts through which people negotiate these roles, like in family.
It's almost you've got a petri dish here and you're growing this concept. And it's
right,
interesting to
you
see what
use this
direction
as
it's
a
going
tool
in.
to negotiate. Like a younger generation have stronger sense of privacy versus the older generation. So they are not happy when their parents look at their diaries and so on and so forth. And then the young couples struggle with more personal space, yet they're also afraid of like losing intimacy. So they use privacy.
And they're talking about this online, and you're tapping into it, and
exactly,
and you're able to monitor it.
exactly, yes, something like that. I discover how, because when they vent their frustrations and grievances, they write online, they tweet online. So I
Which is another interesting way in which they're defining privacy. I mean, not everybody thinks it's okay to tweet or talk online about
it's
private issues, right?
Yes, different protocols, different values, different practices. So I was trying to find out if there were any consensus of what people were doing when they use the word privacy online.
That's interesting, because it seemed to me that in the U.S., when social media first started, people were just in contact with their friends, and they shared more intimate, personal things. And then, as the internet grew bigger and bigger, people started to learn the lesson that anything you put online is out there, and you lose control of it, and it may cause problems for you. So people started withdrawing a little bit.
Very much so. I think it's caused by this tension between this liberal principle that privacy is important, is sacred. At the same time, privacy also takes place in this information market. A lot of people trade their privacy for convenience. For like for instance, I would see, I buy something, and then I see these ads following me about the things I just bought, but it makes things more convenient. So a lot of people
I do that
caught
too.
in between.
Those ads will show up on my
it is
phone and I'll
important
look
in
at 'em.
principle, yet in practice, I can just give it away for free for something nice. So different cultural contexts.
Do you go so far as to consider to what extent the internet is actually causing this change, or are you just looking at it right now as a way of monitoring the change?
I think both, because it's so integrated in our lives. So it's I don't see a very clear divide between online and offline because oftentimes our experiences are mediated by our tweets. We connect with our friends and family and even work relations with social media and so on and so forth. So it's very much part of the parcel of the process.
Well, do you think that and maybe this is straying too far from your topic, but I mean, do you think that China is on the same path that Western Europe was on when when in the early Enlightenment, when the coffee houses were opening up and the taverns were opening up, and the first newspapers were being published and things in the 16th, 17th century, and that openness and that exchange of information that sort of led to the development of a public sphere. Do you think that's happening because of the internet now in China?
That's a good question. I think yes and no at the same time, because that's always a safe answer to a complicated question. Yes, in the sense is that, as I mentioned, that because the state gradual retreat from socio-economic sphere, that more diverse social groups, social forces get to participate in socio-economic life. So we do see people talk about different things online, but to the extent that internet researchers argue that the internet serves as a burgeoning search as a place for the fledgling civil society to take shape. But I sort of went about a different, went with a different model. So because it's all, in the effort to understand the internet, you have different ways, different models, and different theories applied. So I happen not to choose that public sphere model.
No, that makes sense. I think I understand.
Yeah.
And you also talk about the network market as well. Can we go into that a little bit briefly before we close here?
Yes. So my argument is like the success of Alibaba, and which is the most successful example of the e-commerce industry.
So Alibaba is like
Alibaba is
like Amazon in the United States.
Online e-commerce player.
Bigger than Amazon.
I think it's bigger in a sense because it also has its own delivery system, its own credit system. So is humongous. So my argument is that the development of Alibaba involves several fields. The field of the market, which consists of sellers, buyers, service providers, and Alibaba itself, and so on and so forth. And then this field interacts with a bigger economic field, which consists of the state, capital, and the labor. And then because these are just the most prominent two fields. And then the development of these e-commerce industry happens when these two fields with different goals and of different sizes try to adjust to each other. Mm-hmm. And then it creates discrepancies, creates misfit, because usually these two fields are in alignment. But now, because things are changing, they didn't go side by side anymore. It creates a lot of momentum for change and also for misfit and slippage between the two fields. So I argue that there is a third field that is a symbolic field where people take positions to define their interests in these two economic fields. So in these symbolic field, interesting things happen, and people take advantage of different economic discourses. For instance, the new normal. It is a term that the Chinese President Xi Jinping used in 2014 to describe a new, slower, more mature growth of China's economy, and then which demands a supply side reforms, which means a deeper structural changes are needed for new growth. So accordingly, the government issued one of the policies was called the Internet Plus, which means the government wanted to encourage the traditional industries to incorporate the internet as the newer infrastructure for economic growth. And then, but this Internet Plus was actually initiated by capital owners, that is the industry players, such as Alibaba. So in other words, these discourses created discursive size in which the capital owners or the industry players and the government they interact.
It was
they
kind
interact,
of
and then
unspoken negotiation. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Each try to push things going towards their way, and then in the process, e-commerce grows bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Okay, that's all the time we have for our program today. Thank you to Dr. Elaine Yuan for joining us on Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. I'll see you next time.